Hello, BookTube. Well, recently, defying any rhyme or reason, this channel hit 7.8k subscribers, and I called for questions, and I got a bunch of great ones. So I thought once again we would devote a series of videos to answering those questions. And the only bit of warning I want to give you ahead of time is that I ported all these questions over from the video on which I called for them to a Google Doc to make them easier for me to look at and handle. So if in that process I deleted one of your questions, don't take it personally, just feel free to ask it in the next Q&A. So we're going to jump right in here, starting with Hannah's books. Do you ever sub-vocalize? When reading poetry, perhaps? When talking to yourself? Perhaps as you write? And what Hannah's referring to here is a subject that I've mentioned many times on this channel before, which is the habit that a lot of readers, 99% of readers have, which is to sound out the words they're reading in their head. Not necessarily out loud, but saying the words in your mind as you're reading them. That is sub-vocalizing. And the reason I brought it up on this channel is because it drastically hamstrings your reading speed. Not that speed is everything, but if you want to read faster, that's a way to do it, is to eliminate that. You do not need to sound out words in order to read them, obviously. There are many times during any given day where you read without sub-vocalizing. It's just a bad habit that people fall into, and I believe the prevalence of audiobooks makes that an even stronger habit. But it's something you can get out of. You habituated yourself to doing it. You can unhabituate yourself to just practice not doing that. It's two different parts of your brain. The reading and the saying are two different parts of your brain. They don't have to go together. And the answer to the questions is no. I don't. Once you break that habit, you don't do it anymore. I don't sub-vocalize anywhere. Jack Ivoniak says, of all the places you've been, are there any that you could caution people against going? Any that you consider to be places one has to visit? No places that one has to visit, but plenty of places to caution against going. The high chaparrals and desert locations, the badlands, in other words, of any country or region that you go to is always a caution. That's where very violent people tend to hang out, and you don't want to encounter such people unless you've got the means to defend yourself. Also, do exhaustive research on the nearness of any civil unrest, civil wars, militant uprisings, that sort of thing. You want to be very careful about that sort of thing. Fortunately, the internet brims with help, travel advisories of all kinds, so that you can know if the place you're going has a prevalence of American tourists being kidnapped for ransom, that sort of thing. You want to be very careful about that. There's nothing nervous Nelly about researching all of that to a fairly well. Mary Tumulty has a barrage of questions, so the brevity part I mentioned is out the window. Question number one, at what age and what location was your first travel experience outside the borders of the United States? You presume I started from the United States. Question number two, please describe your favorite school field trip. Why was it so? Well, it was only my favorite. Everybody else hated it. It was a trip to go to one of those little boutique petting farms. So a working farm in the back 40, but there was a little acre up front that had little pet animals, and the farmers would talk about farming and that sort of thing. I didn't want to go. And when I went, I was feeling lonely and distressed, and you can guess what happened after that. I called all the farm's dogs to me, and we started roughhousing and playing, and left to their own devices, dog play is serious play. It's lots and lots of fun, but it looks terrifying to humans, and everyone was terrified. I pretty much ruined the trip for everybody else, but I had a ball, and so did the dogs. Question number three, please share with us your first experience going to the Boston Public Library. I honestly couldn't tell you. If you mean the old building, the McKim Mead and White building, the Boston Public Library, for those of you who've never been, is a monstrous agglomeration of two buildings. One is a gorgeous, just gorgeous Beaux-Arts temple of learning and literature, and then crafted onto its back half, a century later, was a modernist blockish thing that I hated. I voted against it. I argued and petitioned against it. And recently, that back half, that new library, underwent a massive renovation that did about as much to humanize it as could be done without raising it to the ground. I advocated at the time that it be raised to the ground, and that if you want to build a back half to the library, I'm not 100% sure that's necessary, but if you want to do that, make it identical to the front half. But that wasn't done. But right now, at least, it's as nice as it's ever going to be. And question number four, was your first exposure to the art of John Singer Sargent at the Boston Public Library? No. Thomas RP says, hope you don't retire the Q&A entirely, as you've alluded to this is in this last one. Look forward to these every few weeks. Really? Well, the questions keep coming. Why do you think schools, including universities, develop a hatred of reading rather than a budding interest? How can schools get kids reading for pleasure, if it can be done at all? It can certainly be done. But the reason why, and we're really talking about high schools here, the reason why it tends to swear people off reading is because it's mandatory and dumb. It's not only required, but it's done in an utterly stupid way. You get a handful of the same books. A lot of the teachers haven't read the books. I've met high school teachers who've been teaching the same book, Catcher in the Rye, or a separate piece, for 20 years without ever reading it. They're given talking points, discussion points, and you have to parrot those back. It's treated quantitatively, the way so many other subjects are, when it is not. Reading is fundamentally different. It's not quantitative. But instead, it's treated that way. You have a set number of points that you have to regurgitate back. You have a set number of pages that you have to read by a given week. Naturally, that's going to put anybody off that can be put off by reading. It's a gauntlet that only the real readers ever pass through, when you could be making real readers if you change the system so that the reading was led by enthusiasm and followed up with points of interest and quantitative analysis. But in order to do that, you would have to let the students pick their own books. Help them knowledgeably and let them pick their own books. And that brings us right back to the teachers. Most high school teachers are not able to do that. It's a brutal fact. I think they're heroes in what they do, but most of them are not able to do that. So it just won't ever work. It just won't ever work, unfortunately. That's why I try to get to so many high schoolers if I can, and convince them this is fun. No matter what your school has led you to believe, this is actually a whole world that opens up, that you can not only travel in, but you can make parts of it. You can start to make it yourself. Every one of the people that you're reading went through what you're going through right now in high school, where they weren't writing, where they were only reading, and they went on to make something. A lot of them respond to that, but the way it's taught now in high schools, no way. Corey Black says a few questions. Number one, what is your favorite Ben Franklin biography? Most of my favorite Ben Franklin biographies are not whole life biographies. Richard Marius did a whole life biography that was rather good. Walter Isaacson did one that wasn't, I thought, quite so good. But most of the ones I like are fragments of his life. They cover the whole life, but they concentrate on his time as a young man in Boston, or his time in Paris, or that sort of thing, where you're concentrating on one aspect of him. I found those to be more enjoyable. The big one-volume full life biography, I would go with Carl Van Doren, or maybe Thomas Fleming. Both of them wrote pretty good ones. Number two, what is your favorite John Quincy Adams biography? Well, it would be, I think it's Kaplan, whoever it was. I discovered just about a year ago that one John Quincy Adams biography, one fairly new one, has a blurb by me on the paperback, so that would be my favorite, whatever it is. Question number three, you have mentioned a few times that you don't drive. Why is that? It wasn't part of my curriculum. I never got around to doing it. And now I think I'd be terrible at it, so I wouldn't want to learn now. And question number four, what is your favorite collection of letters? Well, this one, Letters of the Century, is a collection of American letters that's terrific. But it's wide-ranging. It covers lots and lots of people. A collection of one person's letters would probably be One Art by Elizabeth Bishop. That's a terrific volume. Totally involving. John O'Doherty asks the inevitable question, what are your updated thoughts and feelings about the election? If these record voting numbers are voting against re-election and Biden wins convincingly, how could Trump possibly not hand over the presidency? I often think back to your video on Gandhi and how the people will always outnumber the government. If Trump refuses, do you see it going in the direction of mass nonviolent protests? Nonviolent? How about extreme violence? How about extreme violence? If Donald Trump refuses, if he loses the election and refuses to go, he is engaged in a coup against the United States government. And if he's engaged in a coup against the United States government, then he and everyone connected with that coup should be murdered by the nearest American using any implement that comes to hand. That is a fundamental rupture with the rule of law in this country. Nonviolent protests to win brownie points with who? The Royal House of Trump? No, if he refuses to go, then he's committing high treason, and so is everyone else involved with him. If he loses the election, he's committing a coup against the government. Nonviolent protests have no place when it comes to that. But when you ask how could he possibly not hand over the presidency? You have to keep in mind, we're not talking about just one corrupt person here. Donald Trump's signature evil throughout his entire life, the way in which, for instance, he fundamentally differs from Richard Nixon, is that he corrupts other people, systematically corrupts other people. He has corrupted the whole Department of Justice. Who knows how much of the DC police, and a gigantic private militia of his own, those pot-bellied, unshaven goons in body armor that you saw during the summer's riots in Washington, D.C., were not part of any branch of the American military. They were Trumpists in armor. Trump has corrupted all of those people into being willing to prefer him over the government of the United States, over the United States of America. So it won't just be him if he refuses. He will have a Department of Justice that's perfectly willing to go to court, subpoena people in furtherance of a coup. The unspoken but underlying statement of everything that Donald Trump has said in the last year is, I kind of want to rule forever. I kind of want to stay in power. I don't believe in the election unless maybe I get a candidate I really like, and unless it's all done in just the way my tiny, tiny little ill-lit brain thinks it should be. Under such circumstances, if you were to orchestrate it, I need to pick the candidate, of course, and I need to pick all of the venues and the ways to do it. But if under those circumstances somehow that candidate were to win, well, maybe then, but otherwise, no. That's treason. So nonviolent protest, I hope that it isn't met with nonviolent protest. John Petter says, Alan Lichtman, the historian who has correctly predicted every U.S. election since 1984, says Biden will win the coming election. Do you hold a similar view? No, I do not. Ducky Little Dictum says, if you could choose a president from any living human being, who would it be? I would choose a normal person. Someone like Mark Richardson, actually, from Richardson Reads. Rock solid head on his shoulders, perfectly reasonable, very careful with other people's money, always willing to sit down and think about how the other person is looking at any situation, and yet never loses his ability to come to an informed and firm decision when the time comes. A rock, in other words. Mark happens to be the one that I know, but I've known others in my life, and you probably know one or two yourself. Someone like that, someone who will surround themselves with experts, who will listen to people, who can have the piss taken out of them when the wine is flowing at night, doesn't have delusions of grandeur, but who is still capable of making a rock-solid decision once they have all the information they need. Something like that. Somebody like that. I would take Mark in a minute if he ran for office. Connor says, when you taught, did you teach outside the U.S.? If so, how is it different than education in the U.S.? I actually did both. I taught in Germany for a bit, and in addition to the United States. And the one difference that leaps right out at you is that outside the United States, it's taken seriously. And it's not in America at all. Even when I did it back then, now it's not at all. But even then, the difference was night and day. In the one, you had your students on your side helping you to teach them. And the other side, they were very much dedicatedly the opposition to anything you did. Question number 2, what do you think of Amy Coney Barrett? She's intensely dangerous. And not just for her ideological views, but also because who would take this job under this circumstance? She has to know what everybody else in the country knows, thanks to the incredible hypocritical behavior of the Republican Senate. She has to know that she is a purely political appointment. And yet she has decided to take the job. Who would take the job under those circumstances except a cat's paw? So not a high opinion. Number 3, how is Patrick doing? Has he gotten a dog yet? Who'd want a dog? Question number 4, what are your thoughts on Khalil Gibran? Local boy, I like him just fine. Question number 5, I had to read The Crucible for school and I did not like it. I can't tell if it was me misreading it or the play itself. What are your thoughts on it? Well, it's a stillborn novel, as is so much of what that author wrote. I mean, the stage directions are novel writing. And that might have thrown you off, because that's not what we expect from drama. We expect stage directions, maybe, but no, not paragraphs and paragraphs of stage directions, not dictating the intonations and facial expressions of the actors involved. Maybe it might be better, that could put you off. It might be better just to watch The Crucible, watch some version of it, and you might get the drama better there. And question number 6, previously you urged people to leave the U.S. Do you plan on doing this? And if so, where do you plan to go? My travel days are over. So no, I will be sticking it out. Golden Books TAS says, I've heard you talk of your 5 guys, but have since forgotten them. and I can't find a video mentioning them. Could you please remind us of the list? And also, what does one have to do to make it onto such a list? My 5 guys are Alexander the Great, the Roman Emperor Trajan, the Dutch humanist Erasmus, Samuel Adams, and President William Howard Taft. And there isn't any one thing that they all did in common to get on that list. Elisa Cocciarelli says, along with Eichmann, would you... That's Eichmann in Jerusalem, right? We're not sunglass wearing Hollywood executives pitching things quip in between Coke binges in an elevator, right? The name of the book is Eichmann in Jerusalem. Along with Eichmann in Jerusalem, would you also recommend Arendt's later work that seems to be a bit more philosophical? Books like The Human Condition and The Life of the Mind. Why do you think she turned to philosophy late in life when she was so good at real writing? Well, she became fond of the sound of her own voice, as philosophers do. I would separate The Human Condition and The Life of the Mind. They are a lot more readable than typical philosophy. But, yeah, writers tend to get that way later in their careers. They get windy. It's a shame. The Steve Doctrine says, number 1, just multiple questions. Every one of you, multiple questions. I know I'm not the only one, especially with my generation, Z, that often wishes they were somewhere or even someone else. Even when I'm reading, I think how I'm missing out on this potentially fun friendship or that potentially fun party. Do you have any advice for young people in dealing with FOMO? FOMO is fear of missing out. And you'd think my foremost piece of advice would be to eliminate social media from your life. Since social media is built on FOMO. It's built on that. You might get lots of other stuff from it, news updates, funny memes, that sort of thing, but it is built on generating a constant fear that you must check with this social media platform all the time or you're missing out. And I'm not saying that. You currently consume 10 times as much social media as you should. Not 10 points or 10 fractions, 10 times as much as you should. So, of course, I'm suggesting that you cut down on social media, but not cut it out. It can be wonderful. The main thing that I would suggest here to avoid FOMO is to make your life something that you treasure. If you love your life, you won't have any fear of missing out. You won't yearn to be other places or other people. If you get through with your 10 hours of slack-jawed, drooling, comatose sleeping every night, if you awake in bed in the morning and you don't feel an absolutely tingling eagerness to get out of bed and start your day, if your life doesn't make you feel that way, then you need to work on your life to make sure that it does. It's the only life you get. And once you do feel that way, once you wake up in the morning and are unbelievably eager to start your day, you won't feel FOMO at all. The key is to make your life something that you love. Then you'll be interested in other people's lives, but you won't obsess about them. You won't feel like you're missing out on anything at all. Number 2, a far more pressing question. Does a youthful Jack Kennedy make it into the stone-cold super hottie category, or was he ever only a mere super hottie? When he was 17 and 18, when he was just beginning to become a serious tobacco addict, for instance, but when he was first coming into his beauty, he had the Kennedy beauty when he was 17 or 18. After the age of 22 or 23, he was still good looking, but he was so sickly looking. There was a point. There are a few photographs and bits of movie from the Kennedy Library that still show it. When he was just that age, where he could manufacture the semblance of glowing with health, and then he was a super hottie. After that, he was just a handsome man. And question number 3: who are some people in history that you believe are great examples for younglings today who are trying to figure out how to live their lives? Is JFK one? Don't do it. My advice would be don't use people as examples. Figure it out yourself. You already know what right things to do in life are, and you already know what the wrong things to do are. You already know what's lazy and what's hard and worthwhile. You already know where self-sacrifice is the thing that you should do. You already know all of those things. So extrapolate from what you know. Figure the rest of it out and be yourself. But I wouldn't suggest any people as examples. No, no, not at all. Man Bro Joe Ho says, barrage of questions. Okay. Number 1, when writing fiction, how do you create characters? How do you keep track of their appearance, personality, etc., in order not to contradict yourself at different points in the narrative? How do you keep track of their arc? Well, if you've created them correctly, their personality will sort itself out. You shouldn't have to remind yourself such and such a character has such and such a personality, because that should govern not only their actions, but their dialogue. But other than that, the way I do it with the little details of facial color or whatnot is just to keep track throughout the document. I'm writing on a computer, as you should be too, not on a yellow legal pad or on a manual typewriter. If you're writing on a computer, it's easy to check your previous work and find that out. If that seems cumbersome to you, another approach that writers I've known have used that has worked for them is a corkboard right next to where you work with little index cards for each character that tell you those little details so that you remember them, left-handed or right-handed, gold hair, blue eyes, that sort of thing. Each one, just very briefly that, so that you can just look up and remind yourself of that. That tends to work for people, so maybe that would work for you. Question number 2, your favorite Swedish author or favorite Swedish novel? I don't know authors or novels well enough to really make a systematic favorites list. Per Olav Enquist, The Royal Physician's Visit, is a novel that I really liked, but I don't know that he would be my favorite writer. Number 3, excluding the Vikings, what is your favorite nonfiction work about Sweden? I don't know the field well enough to know. I've read a lot of books on Vikings, but not otherwise. And question number 4, can you tell us a story about your travels from when you were in Sweden? I spent a lot of time in Sweden, and most of it in the country's vast wildlife areas, vast nature preserves, not the civilized parts of the country, but the nature parts of the country. Sweden is still home to a huge amount of charismatic megafauna. Most countries just are getting rid of them, and Sweden is not. So I've had moose sightings, no moose encounters, thankfully. I've had plenty of bear sightings in the wild parts of Sweden, but no actual bear encounters. And not only wolf sightings, but also wolf encounters that were wonderful, absolutely wonderful. All my memories of Sweden are from the natural parts of the country, not from the cities, unlike most other countries up in the northern hemisphere, the northern parts of the world. Most of those there's at least some memories of cities and people, but with Sweden it's almost all animals. Jenny Parks says, why does Meg look like an overly dramatic toddler on your shelf? Makes me smile every time. Yes, Meg is throwing a hissy fit up there. Also, I prefer to watch adaptations before reading. It lets me know how fast to bump something up on my TBR. Am I a monster? Some people think. You could very well be. I am not in a position to diagnose how much of a monster you are, but watching adaptations ahead of reading the books is not monstrous at all. Not just because it gives you a quick synopsis of what you're going to encounter in the book, but also, as you've heard on this channel many times, because the adaptation is almost always better than the book. Why not watch it first? Watch many of them first. If they intrigue you, if the adaptations intrigue you, then you know what you're going into with the book. I've never found that to be a bad idea at all. Archer McKay says, I'm struggling to find Mary McCarthy's nonfiction anywhere. I've found a small collection called On the Contrary. Is it still worth pulling the trigger on? It's a very good collection, yeah. But that and the Venice and Florence books is about it. Do you know of a website or something where me and my fellow Donohuguenots can go and share your admiration for the great critic's occasional prose? Okay, well, my guess would be that Archer McKay is not trying hard enough. Mary McCarthy, for instance, wrote a book called Occasional Prose. It's a collection of her nonfiction deadline work. And many, many, many copies of it are available. If you go to eBay, you can find one for $6. You can find 10 for $6. So maybe try a little harder. Mary McCarthy is not hard to find. She's not as in print as I would like. But Library of America did a volume of her fiction. They're going to do a volume of her nonfiction. That ought to cover it. Nicholas Lesotiakis says, as an exceptionally quick reader, what are the types of passages during which you tend to slow down, intentionally or not? Well, the imbricated, the complicated passages, the ones that have multi-layers, multiple things going on. If the author has labored over a passage, then I will often slow down to read it. Also, in response to my question on Kingsley Amis in your previous Q&A, you said you aren't sure how much of his critical output he wrote himself. What was that about? Just a guess. That's all. Later in his life, when Kingsley Amis was literally incapacitated by 11 with drink, literally, so that people were heaving what seemed like a dead body up off the floor. If he was like that at 11, at a club in London, and he filed an abstruse and very well thought out preface to some new introduction of the letters of T.S. Eliot at 5 that day, then I am suspicious that he wrote it. That's all. Carolyn C. Criera says, number 1, do you have Penguin Black classics in other languages? No. Number 2, I know you don't like Hamilton the musical, but what do you think about the biography that inspired it? Ron Chernow's book is great. And number 3, you said once that your sainted ma didn't like animals. Well, she thought they were dirty. Dirty, dirty animals. So how did you end up growing her up around so many dogs? Well, it was a deal breaker. I needed my babies, and they needed me. So there were dogs around, and it just became obvious that we were bonded and that they had to go together. Helen Utzinger says, if this has not been asked before, would you tell the story of how and why you accumulated a wall of penguins? Well, I didn't start this way. Even when I started this channel, some parts of that wall weren't penguins. But then it became obvious that it could be that way, that I could fill that out. And I love it. I don't know why I hadn't done this before. I love it. Go to it all the time now. Doctrined Marxist 39 has a barrage of questions. Good Lord. Let's see. Number 1, I have emailed you about last week, about which I received no response, which I'm assuming either you were busy, didn't see it, didn't go through for some reason, I typed the email address wrong, or simply because I sent it through Yahoo. So let me know an update on that. No. I get between 300 and 500 emails a day. If I missed an email of yours, feel free to send it again. But I don't even get to answer all of those emails. If you don't expect updates on the status of your email. No, I'm sorry about that. Question number 2. Let's just move on from that one. Last Q&A, I asked you. I forgot to answer this since you were busy with Frida. What works of Marx and Engels have you read? I've read everything by Marx and Engels. Question number 3, why do you like Erasmus the best as a Renaissance humanist? Why would you favor him over Luther? Well, Martin Luther wasn't a Renaissance humanist. He favored bloodlust, wanted bodies stacked like cordwood in the courtyard of churches. Erasmus believed in humanism and dialogue and peace. So they're really not. There's really apples and oranges there that you're comparing. Question number 4, I've watched most of your videos lately to try to get a sense of what you are politically, and to my surprise, it did look like you didn't fit in any category, since you dislike Trump, but still have patriotic views of this country. What do you think of this? I think you're right. You won't be able to discover my politics from my videos. Question number 5, in your video on the Communist Manifesto, you said communism can't be ignored. Could you go in depth in what you meant by it? Just that it's incredibly important. Millions of people have lived and died under it, so you have to study it. You have to know what it is. Question number 6. I was a bit confused of what you meant by dude bros from your many videos on Meditations of Marcus Aurelius to Jordan Peterson, until I found out who they were and share your disliking of them. What's your briefs and general thoughts on them, especially when they say how humanities and social sciences degrees are useless? Well, obviously, I'm not going to be able to tell my whole opinions of them in the Q&A. That's a huge, huge subject. But when it comes to them decrying degrees in humanities and social sciences, I should point out that the main reason they do that is because they think those are the degrees that are flocked to by women. And dude bros don't think women should go to college. Women belong in the kitchen. It's okay if you read a little. I don't so much mind if you read a little once the daily chores are done, but no college. I want you here to make supper for me and all of my male children. That's the reason that they hate those things. Not because they think those disciplines are inherently faulty, but because they don't want women going to college. Question number 7, what did you graduate in university? Because I think you mentioned it a couple of times. I have degrees in English and in creative writing. And lastly, pretty morbid to say this, but eventually we will all pass away. That's not morbid. Once you do, what do you plan on doing with all of your books? I don't have any plans. I don't. Obviously, since I can't guarantee that they would be followed, I'm hoping that if I see it coming, if I know the end is coming, I'm hoping that somebody will take my library and give it a nice loving home. But otherwise, it'll be boxed up and sent piecemeal to the Brattle or someplace like it. I won't be around to care. So, CM Spiff says, what are your thoughts on Something Wicked This Way Comes? And do you have any other Halloween-themed book suggestions? Well, I like Something Wicked This Way Comes. And of course, for a Halloween-themed book suggestion, I would recommend Local Haunts, a HorrorTube, BookTube anthology that is out now, available for your purchase. It's 19 stories, all dealing with the horror stories that generate from specific locations, all from booktubers, a lot of booktubers that you know and watch. I don't have a copy here because I'm a bad pitch man, but I would strongly recommend that. Colo 1546 says, what are your thoughts on the writings of Thomas Paine, Robert G. Ingersoll, and Chapman Cohen? Okay, you mean their atheist writings here. You're not talking about Common Sense by Tom Paine. In terms of their atheist writing, they're all really good, especially Ingersoll. And question number 2, do you like the nonfiction writings of Martin Gardner or Clifton Fadiman? If so, any recommendations? I would recommend The Joys of Wine by Clifton Fadiman. It's a pretty good, pretty good volume. Let's see here. Anthony Silpa says, I've noticed during your Penguin Classics tour that the major 18th century British authors have been largely absent. Swift, Sterne, Fielding, Defoe, etc. Is that intentional? Can we assume that you don't like that era of literature, or we just not reached? No, you can't assume that I don't like that. I'm not building this Penguin Library systematically. I'm building it piecemeal. But that I don't like Jonathan Swift or Henry Fielding, I love them. No, it's just happenstance, that's all. Mary Brock says, number 1, any opinion of a very short introduction series from Oxford University Press? They're pretty good. They're not and noticeably any better than Wikipedia, but if you want your introductory books in book form, they'll do. Number 2, you recently mentioned Katharine Hepburn was your favorite actor. Can you recommend a biography? Right now, I would recommend Kate by William J. Mann. But there is a strong rumor, I'm hoping, that a truly great biography of her, all of the ones that exist now have their flaws, including Kate. But rumor has it there's a truly great-looking biography coming out either in 2021 or in early 2022. We'll see if it's as good as advertised. And question number 3, recommendations for popular science books on bats. Question influenced by recent squealing. That squealing for that bat book that I had has become a meme of its own. I would recommend something like the little Golden Guide books that used to exist. You can probably find them online used now. They're just a very good illustrated introduction to bats, or again, Wikipedia, and then go into something more specialized. What you want to do is understand a basic overview of their evolution, basic overview of their biology, the 2 different branches, Micro and Macrochiroptera, and then specific bats, specific locations and things that they do and don't do. And any good overview will give you that. The Golden Guide is just the one that I loved. Julie Alvar says, you've said many times your traveling days are over. Why is that? Well, a number of reasons. I'm not really capable of travel anymore, and also the world has changed. Travel it's a lot less accommodating, no pun intended, for the world today, especially if you're traveling with a dog. There are draconian quarantines and regulations everywhere now that didn't exist before. Probably for the good of humanity, but bad for the ramshackle old days of traveling wherever you want to go. The room note says, number 1, do you think there is a treasure or important artifacts hidden on Oak Island? I think there's probably important artifacts on Oak Island. I doubt there's any treasure. Number 2, Carl Sandburg is a local hero where I live. Is he worth reading? He's very much worth reading, yes. And question number 3, what creepy crawly was the most terrifying to run into during your travels? Well, the thing about animals of any kind that you meet on your travels is that they tend to want nothing to do with humans. They tend to want to just run from humans. So the unnerving thing, the terrifying ones are the ones that don't do that. So if you're walking down a dirt road in India or Indonesia or wherever and you see a big snake crossing the road way ahead of you, and it stops, lifts up its front section, looks at you, and then starts coming right towards you, that seems unnatural. That's extra creepy. And the same thing is true with everything else. Snakes, it's especially bad. But the 2 things that don't care whether you're human or not are ants and mosquitoes. And they can be everywhere. And they can be seriously painful or problematic if you're dealing with them. They aren't marquee scary like a shark or bear or something, but they are the things you'll have to deal with. And that I believe is it. I'm gonna wrap this up. That's 30 minutes, so we'll move straight on.